It's a lekker warm welcome to you, the listener and the viewer out there. This is another exciting episode of the Professional Plumber Podcast. This is, again, a lekker technical discussion that we're going to have. And as usual, I don't roll alone alone for these podcasts and vodcasts, especially for the technical ones. I have our technical expert and knowledgeable person, Mr. Richard Bailey, calling in through the internet. Richard, a warm welcome to you as well.
Thanks, Willem. I thought when you said technical expert and knowledgeable person, I was expecting to hear, I don't know, John Jones or somebody like that. And then I was quite surprised when you said my name. But anyway, we'll do our best.
You know what, Richard? When I say technical guru, you always correct me. You say that no, Willem, I'm no guru.
I'm just a plumber.
So, as I was doing my introduction, I thought, okay, let me think of another word to use there.
We do our best, do what we can.
Listen, Richard, it's going to be a lekker technical episode today. We're going to discuss, the accessibility to drain and wastewater pipes, or drains and wastewater pipes. And I'm sure that, it's a topic that sort of is in the back of the mind to most consumers and most people in the public out there, even to architects and those kind of things. But it's a topic that's close to heart to the plumbers and the plumbing industry. So I think there's a couple of things that is to be said about it. And I do have a couple of questions that I want to ask you about it. But before we get into the juicy details of our conversation, let's just go to a quick ad break. To our listeners and our viewers, don't go away. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. You are still tuned into a lekker technical discussion of the Professional Plumber Podcast. And this episode, Richard Bailey and I are discussing the accessibility to drains and waste pipes. Now, Richard, just before we went into the ad break, when I introduced our topic of the day and what we're going to discuss about, I mentioned that, accessibility to drains and sewer pipes and waste pipes and those kind of things is something that's sort of an afterthought. It's always when, in many cases, in many instances, that your architects and those kind of things, those kind of people, they usually focus on the aesthetics of a building and a design, and they sort of forget that plumbers have to access those pipes and those drains and those waste pipes. It's sort of an afterthought, but it's close to the heart of plumbers, because it is clear that when there's a blockage, plumbers need to access drains and waste pipes. Yeah. So now I want to ask you, are there clear standards that dictate the measure and the extent of the access that's needed or that's required?
Willem, they absolutely are. But before I go in there, I just wanted to warn you against one thing. Before we went into the ad break, you said, before we get into the juicy details. Now, I wanted to remind you that we're talking about sewage systems here. So I don't know how many juicy details you want me to get into when we talk about sewage systems, but it's fine. We'll overlook that and carry on with the podcast. So, all right. But Willem, back to sanity. Absolutely. There are the standards are very clear, and for obvious reasons. You know, you mentioned that there is a notion, or not a notion, there is a tendency sometimes in certain designs of buildings to overlook the requirements, the access requirements after the fact. Everybody's wanting clean lines, clean facades, uncluttered facades, no visible pipes, etc., which is great. But then, and there are ways to achieve that and still comply with the requirements. And if you have a look or think back on a podcast or a vodcast that we did a while ago, we spoke about ducts and duct work. So we're not going to go into ducts and duct work now, but it's hand in hand with this. So there are ways, and there is an oversight of the required access. You've got to get into these things. So yes, SANS 10252/2 and SANS 10400 Part P will speak to a large volume about access, and that's pretty much where you will get the vast majority of the information regarding the requirements of access for a drainage system.
So Richard, as I alluded to in my introduction, and just before I blasted off with my first question to you, I think the need for access to drains and waste pipes stems mainly from the need to sort of clean drains. You know, you need to, and I would assume to also sort of replace them if they're leaking or something like that, or fix a leak in them. Is that correct?
You're 100% correct. So one's mind immediately jumps to, well, how do I clean this drain? How do I unblock a blockage? How do I get to it to unblock a blockage? So absolutely, yes, that is one of the basic requirements for any drainage system, is the ability to access the interior of the pipe for cleaning, but also for things like inspection. Willem, you know, you need to be able to, I know the time limit on these podcasts are limited, so I'm not going to go into details, but I recently had an interaction, let's say, with quite a large drainage system, and we inspected it internally thoroughly over a 3 or 4 day period, and the revelations that are revealed by just looking at it from the inside, it's incredibly valuable. So yes, you need to be able to access it for inspection. You need to be able to repair parts of it, and you need to be able to replace parts of it, and unblock whatever section might or might not be blocked. So yes, there's all different kinds of access that is required. You know, I just want to, before we move on, I just wanted, and I think I might have given you this analogy. My mind likes analogies, and one of the analogies I work or use when describing the lack of access in drainage systems is, if you go to the car dealership and you buy a brand new BMW, and they say to you as you're driving it off the showroom floor, by the way, it's such a beautiful car, you know, we didn't really want to ruin it with a big old zip or access hatch here. So when you need to replace your brake pads, what we'll do is we'll simply cut the fender away. We've got very good workmen, and we'll just cut the 4 fenders away. And don't worry, the welding department is excellent, and we'll make that weld, once we've put it back, we'll make it seamless. And we've got matching paint and everything. So just letting you know, and that is what some designers of buildings expect homeowners to accept straight off the bat when buying a brand new property. That's the reality of it, Willem, except for the fact that the damage to the building is much more costly and unsightly than damage to a little fender of a car.
Definitely. You know, it's debatable if it's more costly, Richard, but definitely in appearance-wise, if they do fix it, it's not going to be quite as seamless as on a BMW's body part. I can tell you that. It's not going to be a pretty sight to see. But you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, the point is that why are we so complacent about it when it comes to our homes?
Yeah.
Would we ever accept it if we were to buy a brand new car? Absolutely not.
But I think,
and so why are we accepting it in our homes?
I think, Richard, it may be a sort of ignorance and that people don't explain these finer details to the homeowners, and especially from a new design perspective. The designers don't necessarily tell them, listen, but if I design it this way for you, then it's not necessarily going to provide proper access to to plumbers. If plumbers need to replace a part or come and fix it or unblock it for that matter. And then if they have to come and do it, then, the damage to this beautiful building that I'm building for you now is going to be, there's going to be proper damage to it. And it's not going to be as pretty when it's fixed up and closed up again.
Yeah. And I mean, it causes a myriad of problems, Willem. Trust me, it's not just the aesthetic problems of having a big hole chopped in the side of your wall. The problems latched onto that down the line it's a myriad of them. So trust me, it's a crazy notion, but we're not going to get into that today. We will just talk about the requirements of access.
Absolutely. So we've looked at a couple of reasons why it would be necessary, different reasons for why it would be necessary to access drains and waste pipes. But let's talk about what types of access will be acceptable.
So, and again, it depends. And if you think back on why we would need access, we mentioned inspection, we mentioned cleaning, we mentioned repair, and we mentioned replacement. So all four of those things need different types of access. Sometimes a human being must be able to walk into and up to a pipe to look at it. Sometimes you just need a little inspection eye to be popped off and a camera shoved inside. So it depends what type of access is required. And this is where it becomes necessary to understand what the standards require and so that one can be clear. It's actually not that complicated. It's not that difficult. But it's often overlooked. One can go, the types of access could be manholes, inspection chambers, which are slightly different, rodding eyes, inspection eyes, those four roughly, and that could be scattered around the system so as to fulfill the requirements of the standard.
Richard, I know that you mentioned it yourself, that we had a separate podcast about ducts, specifically about ducts and the requirement for ducts, but that is also an acceptable and a required, in some instances, a required type of access.
It is, absolutely.
Right, so Richard, so we've spoken about the different reasons why we would need access to drains and waste pipes. We've spoken to the different types of access that is required. Let's talk about what the actual requirements are and what should plumbers be sure to follow what should they be sure to follow for an installation to be compliant?
Okay, so in a nutshell, and we can expand on this, but in a nutshell, any part or any portion of the system or any interior pipe of the system must be accessible for cleaning, maintenance, inspection, etc. So as a designer of a system, I must make sure that, and I must continuously ask myself the question, I'm putting this pipe here now, how am I going to get a drain rod into it in the future? Now, I just wanted to say something very quickly, that the standards require roddable access. There's a very big difference between roddable access and whether or not a pipe is accessible by means of a very, very nice modern jetting machine or drain snake type arrangement. That's all very good and well, but the standards require roddable access. Good old-fashioned drain rods that you hook up together and you work manually. So that is the access that is required. So that's very important distinction to draw. Basically, Willem, the interior of all pipes, and there are actually quite a number of more specific requirements as well, which we'll get into.
Richard, I wanted to ask you just very briefly, because I'd like for us to go into a quick ad break quickly. But just before we do, I just want to shoot a question to you, just off the charts here, and from the hip. You mentioned that the standards require for a roddable access, right? Is it perhaps that and they haven't sort of been reviewed in the meantime when new types of technology like your cameras and your snake cams and those kind of things have come onto the market and is now sort of more commonly used by plumbers? And that's the reason, well, that's one of the reasons why standards are often reviewed, or not often, but that they are regularly reviewed. Is that true? Am I making
I'll give you my opinion. I'm pretty sure it will never change, because if one were to change it, it would then depend. Let's open that can of worms and say, okay, let's change it. So let's make a drainage system accessible to a modern drain clearing technique. Okay, which technique exactly? Is it jetting? Is it drain snaking? Okay, jetting. Okay, what size machine? What rating of that machine? The best one, the best possible one. Okay, how many plumbers have got that? 2 in the country. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it opens up a very, very, it complicates the landscape terribly. So I don't think that will ever change. I think that the standard would require for good old-fashioned drain rods to be able to access every part of the interior of that system, regardless of the available technology of the time. Simply also because not every a maintenance plumber has got access to this machine. We're talking hundreds of thousands of rands. If you want a full setup to, it's $500,000 rand. So I certainly don't have that equipment in my backyard, and nor does most other maintenance plumbers. So, which means that a badly, and I'm going to call it badly designed drainage system is now going to cost upwards of 50,000-60,000 rand every time to sort out a blockage which shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think it's going to change.
Richard, I'm actually looking forward to hearing more about the specifics of the requirements. But just before we go into that juicy details, let's go into another ad break quickly. To our listeners and our viewers out there, please don't go away. Do stay tuned, because we've got some more details for you just after this. We'll be right back.
Are you having questions about the Plumbing Industry Registration Board and the plumbing industry in South Africa? Well, then join us on the couch and in conversation with the industry experts to answer all your lingering questions about the plumbing industry. The PIRB remains committed to ensuring open and consistent communication within the plumbing industry. So, be part of the conversation. Send us your questions on email at communications@pirb.co.za or on WhatsApp on 079 833 6930. Become a part of the conversation today. #on the couch. #PIRB.
Plumbers are excluded from the Occupational Health and Safety Act 1993 pressure equipment regulations. However, an exception thereto allows plumbers to install geysers up to 450 litres, provided they're installed according to SANS 10254 and manufactured according to SANS 151. In celebration of World Toilet Day, Articulated offers a 10% discount on the SANS 10254, the electric water heater course. Visit IOPSA Training today to book your online course and learn not only what the SANS 10254 requirements are, but also why they are.
Welcome back. You are still tuned into a technical discussion on the Professional Plumber Podcast, in which we are discussing access to drains and waste pipes. Now, just before we went into this specific ad break, Richard and I talked about some of the different reasons why access is needed to drains and waste pipes. We also discussed different types of access that would be accessible. And we discussed the fact that, there are standard requirements of the South African national standards, specific requirements for access to drains and waste pipes. And Richard, now I would like to ask, would it be accurate to say that although there are specific requirements, that individual installations require or would require individualized sort of designs for this access? And can we then go into a little bit more specifics and more specific access requirements?
Yeah. As a broad statement, Willem, your first question is 100% correct. Each system you will have to sit and think about, and you will have to decide how to provide the necessary access to the drainage system. And that might mean changing the design of the drainage system slightly, and that'll have to be done at the quotation and the design phase. But yes, so that is true. It will be specific to the building, although they are there are overriding specific requirements, and which you need to then bear in mind in order to achieve that, if that makes sense to you. So things, and I'm just going to go down a list here, because if you go to the standards, they will give you a couple of pages of requirements, but I've just kind of distilled it down and given some bullet points. So when a discharge pipe enters the ground, now a discharge pipe could be a waste pipe or a black water pipe or a sewage pipe, you need access to the interior of that pipe within 2 meters of the ground level. And just stop me whenever you want to, Willem, to perhaps ask a question. I'm happy. I'm going to go down the bullet points. So within 2 meters of ground level, when a pipe enters the ground, it needs access to the interior of that pipe. Access, so roddable, cleanable access. There shouldn't be any access within a kitchen or a pantry or a food preparation area, except if it is a waste pipe which serves a fixture within that area. So yes, I can get to the waste pipe of the sink in the kitchen because I have to, it's there. Right, so but no other access. I can't put a rotting eye. Perhaps also the washing machine that may be positioned or located in the kitchen. 100%. And another proviso to that is if there is a floor drain in that kitchen and there is a waste pipe which enters and discharges into that floor drain, which you can have, then obviously that is also an access point, and that's allowed. So any access within a building, so if it's within a building and you have to access the drains, and this is the irony of the standards, it said, as far as possible, please don't put any access within any building. But let's just go with what the standards say. If you have to have access within a building, that it must be screwed or bolted down, and it needs to withstand a positive pressure within the pipe system of 50 kPa before it starts to leak. So that is the requirement for any internal access to any waste or drainage system inside of a building. So rodding eyes. Rodding eyes are those things that you would see walking around any residential building, Willem. It would have, walking around the grass, you'll find every now and again this round plastic or sometimes cast iron cover, and that is what, there's many different types, but that is a rodding eye. Sometimes just the round plastic cover is not sufficient. You need to then sink it down, cover it with a manhole, small manhole cover, lid and frame for certain circumstances. But a rodding eye is the thing that you would find on an exterior underground drainage system that allows access to this drainage system from the above ground position. So rodding eyes, or manholes for that matter, because they are pretty much interchangeable. A manhole speaks for itself. It's a chamber that allows for a man to get into. Okay, so they are reasonably interchangeable, and depending on the local bylaws, depending on the requirements of the architect, etc., you could ask for a rodding eye in some cases, or a manhole, or both, or whatever the case may be. So they need to be installed at any change of direction which is greater than 45 degrees, except if the radius of the bends of that change of direction is at least or greater than 600 millimeters radius. So if you have a very slow bend, change of direction, from between 45 degrees and 90 degrees, you can forego a rodding eye at that change of direction twice, with two changes of direction between any two other rodding eyes. I hope that makes sense. So if I'm supposed to have one at every single change of direction. But if I cannot have one at this change of direction because of the circumstance and there's a wall there or whatever the case may be, and I would rather forego it, then I must make sure that the bend that I use for that change of direction has got a centerline radius of 600 or more, 600 millimeters or more. Then I can forego the access to that change of direction. Then a rodding eye or a manhole has to be situated between, or no, not between, I beg your pardon, within 1.5 meters of any main connection from the drainage system to a main connection. So that be municipal sewer, conservancy tank, or septic tank. Within 1.5 meters of that connection, there needs to be a manhole or a rodding eye. And then at the highest point of any drain or any branch drain. In other words, I must be able to start from the top and rod all the way down. So at the highest point of any drain or branch drain, where the branch drain must be provided with access. At the top on top of all stub stacks, we can perhaps do a podcast about that because that's quite an interesting misconception in and of itself and how it should be used and included in a closed drainage system. So we could probably do a podcast on stub stacks. But to note for now is on all stub stacks, there must be a full bore cleaning eye, rodding eye, okay? And then at intervals along the drain of not more than 25 meters, and that is deemed to satisfy from 10400 part P, not more than 25 meters intervals, I must be able to access and rod from. They must be strong enough to withstand the expected conditions. How often have you gone to, you tell me, anyway, driveway, your friend's house, your house maybe, my house maybe, and in the driveway there's this hole, this kind of plastic cover that has been attacked by the UV rays, brittle, and driven over 4 times, and now it's got 3-inch diameter hole, and that's your drainage system. So that's not allowed, obviously. It's got to be able to withstand the expected conditions. You cannot put plastic rodding eye covers in direct sunlight if they are not rated for it, and certainly where there's heavy traffic, cannot put them there. So you've got to use horses for courses. And then where a drain passes under a building, be clear, I'm saying where it passes under a building, not when we're not talking about a toilet pipe coming from a toilet to the outside. That's not passing under a building. We're talking about a drain that enters one side of the building and exits the other side, straight through, pass through. That has to have rodding access from either side, not from both sides, should I say, and next to that building. So I must access that drain next to the building and on both sides. Okay. This is where the standard says you should, as far as possible, not have any access from within the building. Certainly not that drain. The drain that passes in under the building, you may not have access within that building. Any access to the drainage system, whether it's rodding eyes or manholes, should not allow any ingress or egress of water or air. It must be properly secured and prevent that. And it must be marked and visible. I must be able to identify where it is. How many times have I gone to do inspections or looking for stuff, and there is just, where's your rodding eye? Should be one about here. No, I don't know. Okay, so it's not marked, not visible, probably overgrown, probably tree planted on top of it. So that's the in a nutshell, Willem. If you stick to those, that you should be good. You should be good.
You know, as a layperson, Richard, I always tell you that I find these technical conversations very interesting because I learn a lot from them. The fact is that I found it very interesting that you would say that if, you know, a drain pipe that runs, under a building, it enters on the one side and it goes out on the other side. The fact that that specific one, I mean, it goes in on one side of the building and it exits on the other side of the building, that specific pipe is not allowed to have an access point within the house itself or within the building itself. It's very interesting to me to hear that. But I think that's something for another discussion. But what I wanted to ask you quickly, Richard, is we know now that there are specific requirements of the standards, and it's there for a reason. And it's the fact is that if something goes wrong with a drain or a waste pipe, it needs to be fixed by a plumber. And if they don't have proper access to it, how do they fix it without breaking the building down? You know, without grinding open a wall, without grinding open a floor and digging up around the house and whatever the case may be. But the fact is that, well, the question that I want to ask rather is that should architects also know these standards, or is it purely up to the wet water services engineer and the plumber that does the actual installation on a new building, for that matter? Is it purely up to them to inform the architects and the civil engineers?
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. The architects must know this. There are buildings going up that make it wholly impossible for any slight compliance to these requirements whatsoever, because of the design of the building. And so it absolutely is at an architectural level, 100%. There are very, very few buildings going up. Certainly, let's talk about residential buildings that require the services of a wet services engineer. That's far and few between. So there's not a wet services engineer that one can rely on in most installations. It's the plumber. But the plumber now, he's now quoted, you know, he's sharpened his pencil, he's quoted to get the job, and he knows he's in competition with 2-3 other guys. It's a tentative relationship and he wants to get the job. And now he comes and pushes his chest out and said, oh, there's no duct there, that's wrong, you can't access it. What is the perception going to be? And he's placing himself in danger of being you know what, you're the wrong guy, we'll get somebody else who'll just toe the line. So this is the problem. So I find that those discussions must happen right at the beginning.
Yeah.
When the plans are still being drawn, and you say, whoa, with all due respect, this needs to be here and I can't because of that. Okay, now what do you mean? Let me show you what I mean. This is what the standards require. That's where it is. And could we perhaps do? Then it's a sort of a give-take, mutual understanding kind of relationship where everybody ends up being quite happy about it. But if you come in there, you know, after the fact, which sometimes is not their choice, but that's when they're included in the please come and quote, the building's already up kind of thing, come and quote. And now you start saying to them, oh, this is that, that's that, you know, that becomes tricky. Yeah. So the plumbers have got their backs against the wall. And I feel so sorry for the guys that are installing these things, because they know it's not right, but what do they do? So Willem, it starts at the architectural level, absolutely right. And my hope and wish for it to change is that the local authorities would start to clamp down on it and say, no, I'm not giving you occupation because that is not wrong. It's not your fault, Mr. Plumber. It's the design of the building. So if that starts to happen, then we'll see a shift and a change.
But Richard, that also is why these kind of podcasts, these technical podcasts, vodcasts for that matter, carries dual value, because it's valuable to the plumbers out there to hear this and listen to this. And it may be things that they already knew and just needed a refresher and a mind refresher about, or a memory refresher about. Yeah. But it's also good for Mr. and Mrs. Jones, the homeowner, the client, the customer, to know these kind of things, that they can actually from the very beginning, the onset, say, hey, wait a minute, but if you design it this way, then, is the plumber going to have access, or whatever the case may be.
Correct.
Richard, once again, thanks a stack for having shared this information with us. Thanks for your time and effort and having joined me in this podcast. I really enjoy having these conversations with you.
Always a pleasure, Willem.
And then to our listeners and our viewers, do not go away yet. We have drawn to a close of this episode, but we do still have some industry announcements, and very interesting industry announcements that we'd like to make. So do stay tuned for them right after the ad break. For now, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye.
The PIRB has great news regarding uploading your CPD activities. With the PIRB's added CPD Easy link, uploading CPD activities has now been made even easier than before. There are 2 ways through which it can be done. Follow the PIRB's social media platforms for more information in this regard. And of course, it's time to announce the latest winner of the PIRB's article writing competition. Congratulations to Hendrik Miller, PIRB registration number 5828/16, for his article called Whose Side Are You On? Not only has Hendrik won himself an awesome prize, but also has he earned himself a whopping 4 CPD points, as his article will be published on the TMP magazine on App Plumber. Be sure to enter the next round of this exciting competition, of which the next topic is different careers in the industry. We are just 2 days away from our World Toilet Day celebrations. Come and join us at the PIRB's offices in Centurion this Friday, the 18th of November 2022, between 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, for a fun-filled day.